Hello again and welcome to the Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now in today's video we will be doing another regiment review, and I have been asked to do the Valhallans by multiple commenters, multiple subscribers, so that is the regiment we will be covering today. Interestingly, I thought that there would be more requests to do some of the more obvious regiments, like Cajun and Katcham, but I guess those ones are pretty well known, so the fact that people are asking to cover some of the more obscure ones does make sense. And Valhallans, whilst being a very well established regiment in the lore and in the fluff, I mean the Commissar Cyphers Kane books are all based around the Vestroyans, and he obviously has several comments about the regiment he's attached to, which is Valhallan Regiment. So they're very well established and they get a lot of love in the fluff and in the lore, but on the tabletop you don't see them too often, despite the fact that they have some pretty interesting tricks up their sleeve. Now, being honest, and I hope I'm not displaying a amount of ignorance that would make a Inquisitor blush, but I would say that Valhallans, whilst being a good regiment, are not a top-tier competitive regiment. They have some good tricks, they have some neat abilities they can pull off, but as I'm going to be doing this regiment review series, I'm going to be splitting the regiments down into competitive and less competitive. I'm not saying non-competitive, but top-tier and less competitive. Okay, and unfortunately, I'd say the Valhallans overall drop into the less competitive side of things, but they're still very powerful, and we're going to talk about today sort of the best things that you can get out of your Valhallan regiment. Now, as with sort of the Vostroyans, we'll do a tiny sort of fluff bit on the Valhallans. So Valhallans have a particular hatred of orcs. I mean, a lot of regiments do, but Valhallans have a real particular hatred of orcs, because their planet was essentially ruined by orcs, and it didn't used to be as far as I remember, it didn't used to be a frozen ice ball, which it is now. It used to be a relatively lush planet, and then the orcs completely destroyed the ecosystem, and it turned the planet into just a frozen ice ball that it is, and therefore, the Valhallans have got a great resentment for the orcs, because they had to drive, even after their homeworld had been devastated, they still had to drive the orcs from their homeworld. And so, but because it's now a frozen ice world, they now produce some of the sort of toughest, grimmest soldiers out there, and ones that are not afraid of sort of getting stuck in. But also, life is considered to be very cheap on Valhalla. They're essentially meant to be sort of Soviet Unions in space, World War II Soviet Union in space. And they reflect that mentality of waves upon waves of conscript, because they've developed those tactics through having to fight the orcs. So the orcs will just attack you wave after wave, and the Valhallans learn that the best way to beat the orcs is at their own game. So that's their whole shtick. How does that translate onto the tabletop? Well, we have the Regimental doctrine for the Valhallans, which is grim demeanour, possessed of a grim fatalism regarding the prospect of death. Valhallan Ice Warriors will march unflinchingly into the most hellish of firestorms. So, unlike the Vestroyans, this Regimental doctrine affects infantry and vehicles differently. So, infantry units with this doctrine halve the number of models that flee, rounding up if they fail a morale test. Pretty simple, pretty good, and it's very similar to Hive Cult with Gene Stealer Cult, and I do say that the morale aspect does come into effect more than you expect when collecting regular guard, because when you think about it, your guards are only leadership 7, so having that ability to ignore half the casualties running away is actually pretty good. It essentially means sort of the first morale check you'll take, because you won't really need to worry about it once the squad sort of drops below half models. But the first morale check you take, you don't really need to worry too much about casualties. You know, if you take 5 casualties, and then fail your leadership test by 2, then you only lose 1 guy. If you fail leadership by 4, you only lose 2 guys. So it means that it often means that your squad doesn't all run away to morale, and that means that your sort of heavy weapons and special weapons and sergeants stick around after all the riflemen run away. Now the second thing is vehicles with this doctrine that have a damage table double the number of wounds when they have remaining for the purposes of determining what their characteristics are. Essentially, it's very difficult to get Valhallan tanks to degrade. It's very difficult to get Valhallan tanks to degrade because even when they're only on 3 wounds, they're still fighting on, I believe, their top profile. Just double check if we're looking at a Lehman Russ, for example. Let's just confirm this rather than guessing. Just pulling up the good old Lehman Russ now. There you go. So the Lehman Russ, when it's on 4 wounds, where it's on 33% of its wounds, it's still on its full profile, which is pretty incredible. So you take 66% damage and you're still operating at full efficiency. That's pretty good. It's pretty darn effective, that. That includes movement. It's for what characteristics they have. So that's for movement, and that's for shooting. So that's pretty incredible. Now, how do you take advantage of this? Well, unfortunately, the infantry side of the doctrine isn't that useful because, and we'll get to this later, but Valhallans have plenty of ways of mitigating morale almost outright. Now, it is good for some lone wolf squads. It does mean you can send some infantry off on a sort of lone wolf mission and not have to send like a commissar for character support. It does mean that you're not entirely reliant upon commissar character support either. You can just send waves after waves of infantry at the enemy and not worry too much about having to spending points on Lord Commissars and Commissars. You won't lose. Your special weapons should be sticking around anyway. The vehicle side of the thing is much better. A big problem guard vehicles face in general is the fact that an enemy will just degrade them and then leave them. You know, if you get a Lehman Russ down to 3 wounds, you can almost leave it. It's only hitting on 6s. You know, it's pretty much toast. Or even if you degrade them by 1 level, people tend to not have to worry about them anywhere near as much. So the fact that to really diminish a Valhallan's heavy support firepower, you have to kill them. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can't leave things damaged because they'll just get round it. But again, having said that, what's the issue with the regimental doctrine is that, you know, you can just repair your vehicles. You know, between jury rigging, tech-priest engineers, it's not too difficult for non-Valhallan regiments to keep their vehicles in fighting shape, especially with the fact that tech-priest engineers are only 30 points now. So that's kind of the problem with the Valhallan regiment. It does some okay stuff, but it's nothing that you can't just get anyway. You can keep your vehicles in top shape with tech-priest. You can keep your infantry rocking around with commissars. You know, I mean, when you think about it, if you have a Lord Commissar next to an infantry squad, you're reducing the amount of casualties from battle shock by 2 because you go to leadership 9. So you know that, and they're only 35 points for Lord Commissar now. So that's the issue with the Valhallan doctrine. It can be, other regiments can pretty much get the same benefit without even having to take the Valhallan regiment, and they get a different regiment trait on top of it. Now the Valhallans do have some tricks. Firstly, they have access to a very good relic, which is, I'm just going to get the exact name of it now because I know what it does. The relic is Petrov's Mark 45. It's a pistol, and it replaces a bolt pistol, but it's a Valhalla model only, so you can't give this to a commissar. You have to give this to an officer who you give a bolt pistol to. Basically, it's a bolt pistol, which, as per the FAQ, is pistol 2. Strength 4, AP -1, 2 damage. That's pretty cool. Friendly Valhalla units within 6 inches of the bearer can never lose more than one model as a result of any single failed morale test. So, old school commissar rule. If you take a big unit of conscripts and you lose 20 of them, only one guy runs away from battle shock. It's very good. Now, again, on paper it's good. In reality, it's kind of like, okay. So, let's say you take this with conscripts. Well, you're paying 4 points per conscript. Why not just take infantry squads? The answer being you can conga line and you can create a very effective screen. But, you know, screening units are meant to die. So keeping them sticking around for a bit longer is not really ideal. And by taking big blocks of conscripts, you will experience casualty overflow. Whereas a 10-man infantry squad, if they do 20 wounds, they only kill a 10-man infantry squad. So this is something I've been stress testing heavily with neophytes, my Gene Still Occult, and with my Chaos Space Marines. I've been trying to take big 20-man blocks of Chaos Space Marines, and you do find that casualty overflow is a big problem. The fact that the opponent, the casualties don't stop at 10, they keep going, 11, 12, 13. It's bad. Gets rid of a lot of resiliency. You're paying points for conscripts. Why take conscripts? Why not just take regular infantry? The fact that you can conga line, the fact that you can try and screen effectively, it's not enough to commit yourself to the Valhallan Regiment if you're going top tier. It just isn't, sadly. So the next thing to say about the pistol is, what about if you were taking it with regular infantry squads? Well then, what about your regiment trait? The whole point of the regiment trait is to avoid to avoid taking battleshot casualties. Now you're almost doubling down on the regiment trait, so it becomes wasted. So it's a shame. It doesn't really work. And I have tested this. I have tested taking a battalion of Valhallan conscripts with a Lord Commissar with the anti-battle shock Warlord trait, and your Valhallan officer with Petros Mark 45, and 3 squads of 30 conscripts. And I've tested this extensively for a tournament last year, and it just didn't quite work. Conscripts just need to be 3 points to be worth taking. And unfortunately, being 4 points makes them essentially worthless. So that's, unfortunately, the problem with the Relic. It is very good, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with what I've said there. But trust me, on paper, it's fantastic. In reality, it's distinctly okay. It's not bad, it's okay. It does do a job, it's just, the problem is, again, with the Valhallan Regiment, other units can basically get the same results. That's the issue with it. Okay? The Warlord trait. I actually don't know what the Valhallan unique Warlord trait is. I'm going to check it out now. Tenacious. Okay. Oh, this is quite interesting. Roll a dice each time your Warlord suffers a wound or mortal wound. On a 5+, the wound is ignored. If your Warlord has the vehicle keyword, then the wound is ignored on a 6+ instead. That's kind of interesting. 5+ feel no pain on your Warlord. I actually think that's pretty good. Genuinely, I think that's... if you compare it to some of the other ones, like Cajun obviously is very good. Kathachan, you can perform heroic intervention up to 6 inches. That's that's not great. Vestorian's okay. We all hit him on the fight phase. That's pretty good. Armageddon's is okay. Talon is okay. Military Tempest is shite. Mordian is sadly lacking. So the Valhallan one, it's just a solid 5+ feel no pain. You could do a lot worse than that. So it's actually it's an okay Warlord trait. You know, it's pretty. You know, I wouldn't. If you're going full fluff, I wouldn't be disappointed that I had to take that as a warlord trait. Put it that way. Now, there's a big thing. I missed it with the Destroyers. I forgot to talk about the unique order. Fortunately, the Destroyer unique order is not that great. It allows you to shoot when you're in close combat, like Death Corps of Krieg style. The Valhallan one, however, is where... So up until this point, I've been kind of negative. Up until this point, I've been kind of negative on the Valhallans. This order stops them from being completely trashed here. Okay, this order gives them a unique ability which does open up some tactical options. So it's fire on my command. The ordered unit can shoot at enemy units that are within 1 inch of friendly units until the end of the phase, but each time you roll a hit roll of 1 for such an attack, resolve that attack against a friendly unit within 1 inch of the target unit instead. You may choose which friendly unit is hit. The order may not be used to a unit which is within 1 inch of an enemy unit. So you can't shoot... You can't... Let's say you've got a squad of infantry in combat. That unit can't shoot into combat, okay? Let's say you've got a veteran squad behind that infantry squad that's engaged in combat. Now, normally you'd have to fall back so you could shoot into that combat. Not with Valhallans. Valhallans can shoot into combat, essentially, with units that are outside of combat. That's the best way of describing it. Now, what's very interesting is this doesn't get affect. The way you can sort of abuse this is by using auto-hitting weapons, like flamers, for example. But even then, you don't really... What's interesting is you don't... When you shoot into combat, you roll a 1 and you hit your friendly units. It's not a mortal wound that they take. A lot of abilities that are similar to this... Oh, if you fuck it up, you take a mortal wound on the engaged. No, you just shoot. You just accidentally hit the normal unit. Now, I see a lot of people saying, well, you take your immovable wall of conscripts and then you shoot into combat with flamers and stuff. And yeah, it's a very obvious tactic, but that's looking at this almost the wrong way. Like I said, and the reason I mentioned that mortal wound thing before is, you know, we've already established that conscripts and that lot are okay, but they're not great. But you know what? You know what's better? Like, pairing this with Bulgrins. Okay, so Bulgrins are going to want to get stuck into close combat. Naturally. And Bulgrins are very competitive. Okay. Now, sometimes you're going to you're going to be throwing those Bulgrins into things and you want them in combat, tying things up and everything. But at the same time, and your opponent might not want to fall back, you know, especially if it's around objectives and whatnot. Your opponent might take his chances with duking it out with the Bulgrins. And whilst Bulgrins are very good, they ain't invincible. This power, this order allows you to basically keep your Bulgrins in combat and just continuously shoot into that combat. And if you roll a 1 and hit a Bulgrin with like a lasgun, the Bulgrins aren't going to give a shit. Like, they're toughness 5 with 3 wounds and a 2-up save. Go for it. Go for it. So there's that thinking. You can tie enemy units up with vehicles and still shoot into the combat. Your opponent might... what this order is very, very good at doing... Okay, so that's how you can use it aggressively. What this order is very good at doing is defensively getting your vehicles out of close combat, but still letting them shoot. So obviously, if an enemy, let's say an enemy breaks through your screen, he's done lots of damage, but with just a simple remnant squad, let's say a couple of Marines or something, he's consolidated with the damage squad. He's consolidated into your tanks. Now, obviously, under normal circumstances, that tank is tagged. It's engaged. It's not going to get to shoot. With Valhallans, you shoot into combat against the tank. Let's say Lehman Russ. The tank's not going to care if it gets hit by some infantry shots. It's rarely going to take any damage. But you can shoot the enemy unit and kill it, even though it's in combat, and then technically your tank is no longer engaged. So your tank hasn't had to fall back, and therefore it can still shoot. And think about it. You're going to have loads and loads of infantry squads of Valhalla. So even if your tank gets tagged by a relatively intact enemy unit, a 5+ strong squad of marine equivalent, you just keep ordering. You just keep going. You just keep going. You just use your infantry to clean that tank away, and let it start. Clean the enemy units away from that tank, and let it start shooting. So it's that's where the Valhallan strength lies. You've got your good conscripts or your reliable conscripts, but conscripts are kind of shit. You've got your vehicles which are doing well, but you could just take an engine here. Blah blah blah. But this order really brings them back from being probably the worst regiment to a solid okay regiment. Okay, but they're still we've covered Valhallans there, and I don't want people to go away and think Valhallans are shit. They're not. Okay, like I said, they have some tricks. The biggest advantage of them is they save you points. And Valhallans, by saving you points, means you can get more troops on the ground, which means you're fulfilling your fluff obligations. So taking everything into account, as you should do with the Guard. The fact that you don't need tech priests is saving you, maybe 60 points on 2 tech priests. The fact you don't need commissars is saving you, maybe another 60 points at least. It's easy to spend 100 points on commissars and lord commissars combined. So that's like 150, 160 points. You'll be taking things like conscripts. Now, conscripts don't get special weapons or anything, and they're good at just screening. Now, that's going to save you. The fact you're not spending money on equipment, that's going to save you, potentially another sort of 40, 50 points. So, a Valhallan list is able to essentially cut out. What it allows you to do is it essentially allows you to save 150 and 200 points, which you can then reinvest back into your army, which is pretty, which is decent. It's decent. You just have to. I guess you have to go all in. You have to go all in with Valhallans. Now, the last thing, but you do have, because you have to go all in. There are going to be times when this is what makes the Vostroyan regiment trait so good, and the other top tier ones. The problem with this is the last thing to say. Summarize it. Too long, didn't listen. The Valhallan regiment is not top tier because it's not always in effect. You're not always going to be taking morale tests. You're not always going to be having degraded vehicles. Your vehicle might just die. Your infantry squad might just die, or it might not take enough casualties for morale to be a problem. That kind of stuff. It's a situational ability. Okay? And it doesn't really increase your damage output. It just reduces your damage taken. Okay? The top tier regiments, one, they are a consistent ability, not situational. Cadians always getting reroll ones to hit. Kashchans always being strength 4, for example. Vostroyans always having an extra 6-inch range. That's stuff that's pretty much always going to be in effect. But the less competitive regiments, their abilities aren't always going to be in effect. They are situational. Mordian, 5+ Overwatch. What if you don't face an assault army? Your regiment trait is completely wasted. Valhallans, if you're facing an enemy which has the ability to easily just wipe units, like knights, they just wipe units in one go, your regiment trait is wasted. So that's the situational versus consistent. That's what separates the men from the boys, essentially. There you go, guys. Longer video than expected. Double the length of the Vostroyan one, but that's because the Valhallan regiment trait is more nuanced. Vostroyan is very simple, 6-inch range. We can easily calculate how that will be a sweeping change over your army. Valhallans, more situational, more complex. Takes a bit more time to digest how you get the most out of your regiment. But Valhallan armies, I have seen them perform admirably at tournaments. Not top tier, but they've held their own. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave lots of comments. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. If I have, please put them down in the comment section below. Thank you for listening, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.